everyone. My name is Colin. I'm here at the Reptile Barn. This is episode 1 of our new series, Exploring Genetics. So we focus on ball pythons and their genetics. So we're just going to talk about, in each episode, different things that people have questions about when it comes to ball python genetics. Today I'm going to talk about 3 things and focus in on one of them. So one of the questions that often comes up is, why do some snakes look the same but they're called something different? What's the genetics going on right there? So there's 3 main reasons. There's more than 3, but some of them can be kind of condensed into one for that to happen. One of them would be that the phenotype is the same or extremely similar, but the genotype is different. So the genotype is what is written in the genetic code, and the genes all produce or code for different proteins, and the proteins make us what we are. That's what we look like, and our muscles are made of proteins. Everything's made of proteins. The genes determine what proteins we get and what we look like. The phenotype is what we look like. That's our appearance. So sometimes, by luck of the draw, completely different genes can make the exact same phenotype. This is why we get multiple types of albinos, for example. A different gene, maybe on a completely different part of the chromosome, is doing something that removes melanin, and the pigments that make a normal ball python are no longer there. And you have an albino. For some reason, there seems to be several different genes that do that. There's lavender albinos, and there's candies, and there's just the regular albino, and there's toffees, and they all make an albino. They don't look exactly the same, but some of them are pretty similar. The phenotype is the same, the genotype is different. Another thing, another way you can get animals that look very, very similar is when there are multiple lines of the same gene. So the genotype is the same. The phenotype is either the same or extremely close, but you have different lines of it. So you can have different lines of pastels, right? They're all pastels. They're all an allele that was mutated on a certain genetic locus. And they all make the animal look, or the phenotype of the animal is pastel. However, there's different lines of it. So either multiple different individuals came into the country from the wild and they were pastels. They weren't related to each other, but they had the exact same mutation occur that made them a pastel. Or another way you get lines, and this will be familiar with people that are knowledgeable about breeding other animals, because many other animals are line bred. In ball pythons, just like anything else, you can line breed for a certain phenotype that you like. So if you have your pastels and they're just regular pastels, you can hold back, say, the most yellow individuals. So you breed them, you say the 2 best babies, or the most yellow color, you keep those and you breed them back. And then their offspring, you only keep the most yellow ones. And over time, as you do this over and over, 5-6 generations later, you're going to have significantly more yellow looking babies than your original pastel animal. So there's lines. The last reason that animals can look very similar, even if their genetics are different, is if they are what the hobby calls allelic animals. An allele is a version of a gene, right? It's just the particular gene at that locus that you have in a specific animal. Most animals only ever have 2 possible alleles at a given locus. There's the wild type, or what we call normals. That's one possibility for an allele. The other would be whatever the mutation is. So it's a pastel, right? Those are the only possibilities on that gene locus. That spot that has a connection, that has genes, I should say, has normals or pastels. Can't be anything else there. However, there are a few loci, I should say, that have multiple mutations. Now you can still only get 2 in any given individual snake, but in the population of snakes there could be more of them out there. So the most famous one I would think is probably the blue-eyed Lucies, that complex. There's lessers, there's specials, there's Mojaves, there's mystics, there's all sorts of them, and they're all on that same genetic locus, but you can only have 2 of them at a time. And of course there's also a wild type allele on that locus. So what we're going to talk about today is allelic animals. I have a little visual aid here, and I apologize, it's just random stuff from around my house. I don't have a awesome computer graphic or anything for this, but this is just to show you what's going on. We have here 4 genes, okay? We're gonna call this gene apple, gene glove, gene pen, gene ring, gene ring toy, okay? It's gene toy. So, apples, gloves, pens, toys. Now, these are, we're gonna say, are our wild type alleles. And they're all exactly the same, right? Most of these 4 genes only have one alternate version. There's normal or there's apple. There's normal or there's glove. There's normal or there's pens. But on this last one, there's normal, and then there's 3 different versions that you could get, okay? So, let's take a recessive gene. Let's say we have here, in this spot, an albino, okay? If the normal alleles are passed on, one from mom, one from dad, this snake is not an albino, it's a normal, right? If you get, the mom passes on her wild type gene, or allele, but the dad passes on his albino, his apple, you have a het animal, a heterozygous animal. Now, because this gene is recessive, his phenotype, he's going to look like a normal, but we know that his apple here makes him a het. Now, if we pass on, if mom passes on an apple and dad passes on an apple, that animal is an albino. He will look, his phenotype will be albino, and if he ever breeds, he only has the option of passing on an apple. He will always make at least a het offspring, okay? Very basic, you all know this, most of you know this. Let's look at a dominant gene. Let's look at pinstripe, okay? Say, for the pinstripe spot on the chromosome, let's say mom passes on a normal, dad passes on a normal, the animal is normal. It is not a pinstripe, okay? However, mom passes on glove or pinstripe, dad passes on his wild type allele, this animal will phenotypically, the look of the snake will be pinstripe, because it only takes one allele at that spot in order to show it physically. Now, interestingly, if mom and dad pass on their glove and for pinstripe, it will still just look like a pinstripe. It's not going to look any different from if there's one, right? The phenotype stays the same. So now we have, let's say, a codominant trait. Let's say the pen is a banana, okay? If mom passes, we're not going to do both of these again, because by this time you know if both normal alleles get passed on, it's just a normal. If mom passes on a normal gene or allele, but dad passes on a pen for his banana, it's going to phenotypically look like a banana. If they both pass on their pen for banana, it will be a super banana, which phenotypically looks different from a heterozygous banana. And I know in the hobby they don't call these hets if it's a codominant gene or a dominant gene, but that's what it is. It's still heterozygous because it only has one allele on that spot that is the mutation. The other one is still wild type, so it is heterozygous. If it's a super, that means it's homozygous. Okay? Last possibility. This gene has a mom and a dad. We are saying that there are multiple different possible alleles that can be passed on. There's not just normal and pen, normal and glove, normal apple. There's normal, and then there's blue ring, green ring, and orange ring. Okay? So if you get a normal from one parent and blue from another parent, that snake will be this. It will, whatever this is. Let's call it a lesser. Okay? Blue is lesser. If you get a normal and green, and we'll call this a mystic, then you have a mystic offspring. It's a heterozygous mystic, but because it's a codominant mutation, it will look like a mystic. If you get orange, then we'll call that a Mojave, okay? So we have lesser, mystic, and Mojave. Now, normally, you should only be allowed to have the wild types and one possible other allele. But on some of these genes, there's multiple mutations, and they're on the same spot. So you could get a lesser and a Mojave, and that would make a blue-eyed Lucy. Exactly like if you had two lessers, it would be a blue-eyed Lucy. If you have a mystic, I'm sorry, this was supposed to be a mystic and a Mojave, you're gonna get a mystic potion. It's gonna look different. Mystic and lesser, and then there's specials, and there's more. There's others in this complex. And this is what makes an allelic animal. And it took me forever to wrap my head around this. And so this silly, long-winded explanation, I hope helps somebody out there understand what an allelic animal is. Now, most of these versions are going to be pretty similar to each other. They're on the same gene locus, but they're not exactly the same. They're a little different. Sometimes they can be very different. I mean, there's some pretty significant differences between a lesser and a Mojave and a mystic and all the others that are on that. So in later episodes, I'll go through each of the complexes that there are. There's more. There's the gargoyle complex, there's the ivory complex, there's more complexes where there's a possibility for many different alleles. And I will go through each one and name the genes that are in that complex, and we'll talk about them a little bit. But for today, I just wanted to get the point across of what an allelic animal is and why that makes these animals that often look very similar. They don't always. I mean, bamboo, for example, is in that complex, and it looks very different. It's a extreme example of a mutation on this particular locus. So, I hope that was helpful. I know it was very rudimentary. I don't have any good visuals, so I just used whatever I could find around my house. But I know when I first got into breeding and I saw these beautiful animals and I couldn't understand what their genetics were doing, and that frustrated me because I wanted to produce them, but I wanted to be able to know why I was producing those types of animals. I didn't want someone to just tell me, oh, put your mystic to your Mojave and you'll get a mystic potion. But if you breed your mystic potion to a normal, you can't make any more mystic potions. And I was like, why not? I don't understand that. That's why. So I hope that for at least one person, this could help you let that sink in, that understanding of what's going on with the genes. Next week, I'm going to talk about some of the different lines of animals. Some of them are all compatible, like the pastels. Some of them aren't, like some of the axanthics, for example. And I might also go over some of the genes that the phenotypes are very, very similar, but the genetics are not, such as ultramels and caramel albinos, and a couple others that look very similar to those, like monarchs. They don't look exactly the same, but they look pretty close, but the genetics are completely different. They're not compatible. Anyway, so I'll go over some of that stuff next week. I hope that you enjoyed this, and until next time, this is Exploration in Genetics for Ball Pythons And thank you very much for watching.